Senator, thank you so much for joining us.
Emily, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, absolutely. And we're having this conversation the morning after it was announced that President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump had been diagnosed with COVID-19. And Senator, I just want to get your reaction to the diagnosis and if you've heard anything about the president's condition and whether he's doing all right.
So it's obviously concerning. Heidi and I are lifting up both the president and the first lady in prayer. I've seen the public media reporting that he has mild symptoms. I don't know what that means precisely, but I hope he recovers and recovers swiftly because we need him back at full strength.
Right, absolutely. Now, the book, as I mentioned, is called One Vote Away. It's incredibly timely. I imagine it's more timely than even you realized it would be when you set this release date.
It is. So I wrote this book this spring and summer, and it was when I was on COVID lockdown. I was working from home in Houston, and so sat in my living room with my laptop and wrote the book. And obviously, I didn't know there'd be a Supreme Court vacancy in October. I did know there was an election coming up in November, and I think one of the most critical, if not the most critical issue in the election are the judges who will be appointed, and in particular, the justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I wrote the book to really uh, try to explain what's at stake on that front. Uh, the way the book is designed, each chapter addresses a different constitutional liberty. So there's a chapter on free speech, there's a chapter on religious liberty, a chapter on the Second Amendment, there's a chapter on U.S. sovereignty, there's a chapter on democracy and elections and Bush versus Gore, which obviously could prove incredibly relevant if this election ends up being a contested election. Uh, and each of the chapters, what it does is I tell war stories. Before I was in the Senate, I was a Supreme Court litigator. That's what I did for a living was argue cases in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. And so for each chapter, we address the big landmark cases at the court, many of which I helped litigate. And so I try to bring the reader behind the curtain, really to understand what's going on at the court. A lot of people find it hard to really understand exactly what the issues are the court's considering. It can be a confusing or daunting place. And so I try to make the justices real and really and tell the backstory behind many of these cases, which are fascinating, the litigants and what was occurring. Uh, and what's striking, Emily, is in case after case after case, the big landmark cases are almost all 5-4
Mm.
on just a pretty major constitutional liberty. We are one vote away from losing our fundamental rights.
Yeah, and the you mentioned a lot of these cases you have personal experience with. The chapter on Heller is, I think, particularly interesting, and the whole concept, the way that you decided to build this argument about the critical value of that one seat by kind of zooming in on the series of important cases, some of which people might recognize and others they wouldn't, by also kind of weaving in anecdotes and history. It's a very conversational book, and it is really helpful. You mention the work that you do, and you write at some length about the work that you did on Bush v. Gore. I have to
Yeah.
imagine that experience is weighing very heavily in your mind right now. It's another reason this book is timely. Do you anticipate that we will in November be in a situation where the court is litigating matters of ballot counting once again?
So I think that's a very real possibility, and I think there's a significant likelihood of it this election. The last time we had a major contested presidential election was the year 2000, and it was Bush versus Gore. I was part of the legal team representing George W. Bush, and at the time I was a young lawyer and was a campaign staffer. Was down on the presidential campaign in Austin. Actually met my wife Heidi on that campaign. I mean, we were in cubicles about 20 feet apart from each other, and on election night, you'll recall, when the votes were counted, George W. Bush was declared the winner and the race was declared over. But then the margin in Florida was quite close, and so Al Gore and his legal team ended up filing a whole series of lawsuits in Florida challenging the outcomes of the election. And so I got on a plane and flew to Florida. I was in Tallahassee for the entire recount, and it was surreal. It was utter chaos. I remember in our war room, and I talk about this in the book, we had a whiteboard on the wall with a chart. We had 7 different lawsuits that were pending, all simultaneously, any one of which could cost the presidency of the United States. And I think the first 6 days I was there, I slept a total of 7 hours. Um, it was a surreal experience, but the case ended up going twice to the U.S. Supreme Court. The first time it went to the court, we won unanimously, 9-0. The court vacated the decision of the Florida Supreme Court, which was a partisan Democratic court, concluded that the Florida Supreme Court had not behaved consistent with law, and so sent it back for them to reconsider. The second time it went to the U.S. Supreme Court on the question of remedy, the outcome of the case. The decision was 5-4, and by a vote of 5-4, the court ruled that the votes had been counted. They've been counted actually in Florida 4 times. Each of the 4 times George W. Bush had won, and the Supreme Court said enough is enough. We need finality. We need an answer. Under the law, the election is done, and that's what resolved it. And we had, the country and the world had 36 days of chaos, of uncertainty. Nobody knew who the next president was going to be. And we could easily see that again this time. And in fact, it could be substantially worse because Joe Biden has said if he doesn't win, he is going to challenge the legitimacy of the election. And Hillary Clinton has explicitly advised Biden under no circumstances whatsoever should he concede the election. And I think it is entirely possible we would see Biden file lawsuits, not just in one state, but in 2, 3, 4, 5 states at the same time, challenging election results. And that chaos, particularly with millions of mail-in ballots coming in days or weeks afterwards and states changing the standards, we could have a substantial period of uncertainty that goes to the Supreme Court. I think that's one of the reasons it is so critically important we confirm Judge Barrett before Election Day so that we have a full 9-justice Supreme Court able to resolve any disputes. If there are only 8 justices, there's a possibility the court divides evenly 4-4, and an evenly divided court has no legal authority to decide anything, which could easily precipitate a constitutional crisis if we have conflicting Court of Appeals decisions and no Supreme Court able to resolve it.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question for you, is that if this makes it even more important to confirm Amy Coney Barrett, and you answered that question. I wonder, I imagine, given all of the challenges we're already seeing with mail-in ballots and with holding an election in the middle of a pandemic, you also must expect that Republicans are prepared to file lawsuits in one state, if not multiple states at
Sure.
once. Yeah, as well, and so it seems like this could be coming from both sides, in terms of how this becomes such a mess and how we devolve into chaos that could rival, if not best, Bush v. Gore. We're hurtling towards something very dangerous, it seems.
Yeah, it could easily play out that way. And certainly if the election is close, you can envision the Trump campaign filing litigation as well. And as you suggested, Emily, we could have situation where both campaigns are litigated, where there's one state that Trump's declared the winner where Biden's challenging it, another state where Biden's declared the winner and Trump's challenging it. And it could be deeply chaotic.
Mm. Now, your colleague on the Judiciary Committee, Kamala Harris, is also running for vice president right now. Do you have any concerns about how she will handle questioning of Judge Barrett while she's also on the ballot. We've seen her kind of use that position for political theater before. I'm thinking particularly about the Kavanaugh confirmation hearings.
Yeah.
How do you think Kamala Harris will handle this confirmation process while she's also on the presidential ticket?
Well, unfortunately, I think it'll be exactly what you just said, which is political theater, and I fully expect Senate Democrats to try to turn the Barrett confirmation into a circus, very much as they did with the Kavanaugh um, confirmation. They're even prior to this Supreme Court vacancy, the hard left was enraged, filled with fury. They hate the president,
Mm.
and with the vacancy, to borrow a phrase from Spinal Tap, now it goes to 11. I mean, they're just the dial doesn't even go that high to reflect how out of their minds, angry, uh, and they are, and I fully expect. I think the hard left base will demand of Democratic senators that they savage Judge Barrett. I don't know what they're going to attack her on. We've seen, sadly, some Democratic operatives begin attacking her young children. She's a mom of 7, and targeting her young children that she adopted from Haiti. I think that is despicable. Kids should be completely uh, out of limits, and I very much hope they don't go down that road that some of their operatives are suggesting. Uh, we know that previously, the last time Judge Barrett was up for confirmation, that Senate Democrats attacked her based on her Catholic faith, and Senator Dick Durbin from Illinois asked her if she was an Orthodox Catholic, which I'm not sure what that adjective is meant to imply. She's not a member of the Greek Orthodox or the Russian Orthodox Church, but Orthodox was just invective he meant for, do you actually believe the stuff? And Dianne Feinstein, infamously, her comment about Judge Barrett was, the dogma lives loudly in this one. And that kind of religious bigotry, I think, has no place in a confirmation hearing. And not only that, it's contrary to the Constitution. The text of the Constitution explicitly prohibits a religious test for federal office. The position of some Democrats seems to be that if you are a believing person of faith, whether a Catholic or an evangelical or presumably an Orthodox Jew, that you are ineligible to serve as a judge, and that is that's simply not right.
We're sponsored today by Donors Trust, the principled and tax-friendly way to simplify your charitable giving. John and Jane have college-aged children. It wasn't long before the couple discovered the world looked different when viewed through this new college lens. Since then, they've been supporting classroom and other foundational programs that teach the principles of economic liberty, rule of law, and free expression. They could have written personal checks to accomplish their goals, but instead, they opened a donor-advised fund at Donors Trust. At Donors Trust, they knew they would spend less time on administration and more time having an impact. A donor-advised fund is like a charitable savings account where you can manage your giving in a smart, tax-advantaged, and private way. Donors Trust is unique, working with donors at all levels who share a commitment to the freedoms and principles that strengthen America. Donors Trust philanthropic advisors can help you sharpen your giving, discover new groups, and define your charitable legacy. Join the community of liberty-minded donors at Donors Trust. To see how a donor-advised fund could benefit your giving, go to donorstrust.org/ricochet for our 6 reasons to use a donor-advised fund. That's donorstrust.org/ricochet.
Do you suspect the left has any tricks up their sleeves when it comes to Amy Coney Barrett? Because we have seen a preview of what they're likely to attack her on, just
Yeah.
so far as they've mentioned her children, as they've mentioned her faith, and they're talking a lot about Roe. Do you suspect they have any sort of Kavanaugh-esque tricks up their sleeve, though? Because as we remember with what happened to Justice Kavanaugh, they sat on an allegation for a
Yeah.
while, brought it up as the confirmation was beginning. Do you suspect that we will encounter something similar this time around?
Look, I think they'll try. I think they're desperately looking. I sat down this week with Judge Barrett, met with her in the Capitol for about 45 minutes, and I joked with her that the Democrats are desperately looking right now for someone who went to third grade with her who has something bad to say. Um, I don't know. By all appearances, she's led a pretty quiet, buttoned up life, but yet, it is entirely possible that in her junior high yearbook, she said something disparaging about her math teacher. If she did, I suppose we will all find out about it. Um, I think they're digging. I'm skeptical there's much to find, but I don't know that that will stop them from trying. And I think their base will demand that they go into the gutter. And this is one of the things I talk about in the book One Vote Away. The last chapter is on Supreme Court nominations and how to get it right, and it traces the history of Supreme Court nominations, starting with Dwight D. Eisenhower. And Democrats almost always get this right. Virtually 100% of their nominees vote exactly the way Democrats would want them to vote on virtually every case.
Yeah, you have a line in
Repub-
the book where you say they're batting nearly 1,000.
yep, that's right. And on the Republican side, we don't even really bat 500. I mean, we're really bad at this. Many of the worst judicial activists in history have been Republican nominees. Earl Warren, William Brennan, John Paul Stevens, David Souter, Harry Blackmun, the author of Roe versus Wade, was a Republican appointee to the court. And what I go through in the book is I say, look, this is not just random. It's not just flipping a coin and we keep getting unlucky. There is a clear difference between those justices we've appointed who have stayed faithful to the Constitution, who've stayed faithful to their oath, and those who have not. And if you look at the great lions of the court, people like Antonin Scalia or Clarence Thomas or Sam Alito or Chief Justice William Rehnquist, my former boss, all of them shared very similar characteristics. Each of them had served in the executive branch. They had been outspoken conservative. They had been defended the Constitution. And critically enough, they had been excoriated by the media, pounded by the media, and they hadn't wavered. And that, frankly, for me, is the most important criterion I look for is whether you have a proven record in the face of criticism. The alternative, when Republicans nominate a stealth nominee, someone who doesn't really have a proven record, a conservative record, but someone in a room says, "Trust me, deep down they're going to be great." Over and over again, they turn into disasters, and we need to not make that mistake again. The Democrats, by the way, what they're going to do to Judge Barrett what is the same thing they did to Judge Kavanaugh. It's the same thing they did to Sam Alito. It's the same thing they did to Clarence Thomas. It's the same thing they did to Robert Bork. There's a pattern with Bork is really where they initiated it, and his name became a verb to bork someone. Is to smear them, to go into the gutter with personal, nasty, false accusations. It's only the Democrats who do this. We don't do this to Democratic nominees. None of the liberal justices have been subjected to the kind of ridiculous circus confirmations that the left now routinely puts on.
Mm. And that chapter that you just referenced in One Vote Away is a really, really interesting one. And you describe Neil Gorsuch. I think this is probably a question on a lot of people's minds when they read the book. You describe Neil Gorsuch as having been mostly good, and you mentioned that you're disappointed by the gender identity decision that he authored, recently. Is he an example of a justice that someone said in a room, "Trust me, this guy's going to be great"? And how worried are you about his lifetime appointment to the bench right now?
Yeah, look, I'm worried about both Kavanaugh and Gorsuch, and It is too early to tell. Typically, a Supreme Court justice tenure is measured in the course of decades and not years. And we're pretty early into the tenure of both of them. For example, David Souter, first couple of years was actually a relatively conservative justice, and then he began galloping to the left, and he ended his tenure as the leader of the left on the court. Um, I don't think either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch is likely to do that. Between the two, Gorsuch's record was stronger. He had more of a conservative record. But that being said, there was no evidence of Gorsuch ever enduring criticism, ever sticking his neck out and paying a price for it.
Mm.
Kavanaugh likewise, and Kavanaugh is a friend. I've known Brett 20 years. I like him personally. I think he's a decent human being, but Brett Kavanaugh is very much like John Roberts. Both of them lived their entire lives with an eye towards going to the Supreme Court, and so doing nothing controversial that might endanger that. And that we've seen with John Roberts, and John is someone else who I've known 25 years. John has become Sandra Day O'Connor. He has galloped to the left. I think much of that is driven by personal animosity for Donald Trump. I think Roberts despises Trump. And look, it is hard to find two human beings more antithetical than Donald Trump and John Roberts. They're almost total opposites in every single respect in life. But it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate to see Roberts. At Roberts's confirmation, he famously said that a judge should be like an umpire, just calling balls and strikes. And in recent terms, we've seen John not only not be an umpire, but stand up, put on a uniform, grab the bat, and start swinging with all his might. And that is not the job of a Supreme Court justice.
This reminds me of you speak with such contempt for, and rightfully so, for the social rewards in DC for justices who start leaning left. You talk about the cocktail party invitations and how those might dry up if you're someone like Clarence Thomas or Antonin Scalia. Can you pull back the curtain on that a little bit? As someone who doesn't run in legal circles, I mean, of course, that's sort of across the board in DC. You're socially rewarded for leaning left in every direction, whatever the topic is. But how does that work? I mean, how have you seen that happen to people and start influencing their activity as a judge?
Well, we've seen many justices when they go to the court, they grow in office. Grow or evolve are the polite terms that are used. And whenever a justice grows or evolves, it is always, always, always in one direction. They go to the left. You don't have justices do not move to the right. I know of no modern example of that happening in that way. For years, the lead Supreme Court reporter for the New York Times was a woman named Linda Greenhouse. And there was something commonly referred to in DC, which was called the greenhouse effect. And what that was is particularly with Justice Anthony Kennedy and Sandra Day O'Connor, if they voted with the left, Linda Greenhouse would praise them. And they loved to be praised on the pages of the New York Times. It made them so happy. And for decades, O'Connor and Kennedy were the swing votes. And one would go left one time, the other would go left the other time. Greenhouse would praise them. And it's not just the New York Times. It's the Washington Post. It's the cocktail circles. It's you're going to the Alfalfa dinner and the Gridiron Club and these white tie events where look, I write in the book, I want a justice who doesn't want to go to any damn cocktail parties. Like just leave me alone. And the beauty is Clarence Thomas, I don't think you could drag him to a cocktail party. I love Justice Thomas, but I think, look, Justice Thomas in the summer rides around in a bus that he's retrofitted as an RV and parks at Walmart parking lots and hangs out with just like regular people. He's putting on a tuxedo and going to a party in Washington. I think he might well rule that cruel and unusual punishment. We need more of that. It's one of the reasons why I go through a couple of key decision points for justices. So Bush 41 had in one room David Souter and had in another room Edith Jones, who was the strongest conservative on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. Judge Jones is just a rock. Bush picked Souter. Now, why did he pick Souter? Because it was easier. Because Jones is very conservative. She'd been criticized like crazy, and it would have been a fight. It wouldn't have been easy to confirm Jones. So he took the easy path, turned into a disaster. Fast forward to George W. Bush, Bush 43. In one room was John Roberts. In another room was Mike Ludig, my old boss. Mike Ludig, Judge Ludig, was the strongest conservative appellate judge in the country, just like Edith Jones had been a few years back. But Ludig likewise had been unwavering. He'd been pounded, he'd been criticized. And so Bush picked the easier choice of John Roberts, and he's turned into a disaster. With Trump, I advised Trump against picking both Gorsuch and Kavanaugh.
Mm-hmm.
The person I advocated was Senator Mike Lee.
Mm-hmm.
And I advocated that publicly. I can tell you I advocated even more emphatically, privately, and directly to the president.
You write that it was a condition of your endorsement was to add Mike Lee to the infamous list, the famous list, I should say.
It was. So the first chapter of the book, I do a retrospective of some of the raucous roller coaster that was 2016, and it was a surreal campaign. And one of the things I talk about, this is the first time I've written about it or talked about it, is really the behind the scenes of what happened at the Republican convention, where you'll recall I did not explicitly endorse Trump at the convention, and it ended up resulting in a chorus of boos. And I describe how that was, number one, how the speech I gave was drawn almost word for word from the speech that Ronald Reagan gave at the convention where Gerald Ford had beaten him, and the speech Ted Kennedy gave at the convention where Jimmy Carter had beaten him. In both cases, they'd run against the other. They'd lost. Neither Reagan nor Kennedy endorsed Ford or Carter. And the words I used, what I was trying to do in the speech was move Trump to the right, encourage him to be a conservative, to run as a conservative, if he won, to govern as a conservative. And so what I said in that speech is you should vote for candidates up and down the ballot who you trust to defend freedom and defend the Constitution. What I didn't anticipate is that Paul Manafort, who was the chairman of the Trump campaign at the time, he was a Washington lobbyist for decades, and he's right now a convicted felon in prison. Manafort, who had a copy of the speech hours before, Manafort instructed his whips when I got to that section of the speech to whip the delegates to boo. So the boos were not organic. It was a staged step by the campaign, which look, I have to say, going through that, it was less than pleasant. But then, as I watched Donald Trump through the campaign, most Republican nominees, after they win the nomination, move left. Trump actually continued moving right, and that I decided in September of 2016 to endorse him. And what I describe in the book is that when I did so, we negotiated it explicitly with the Trump campaign, and there was a condition, a quid pro quo, which is I will endorse in exchange for, number one, a commitment on the Supreme Court. So he had put out a list of 11 potential judges, but what he'd said was, well, these 11 are the kind of people I'd appoint, or anybody else on planet Earth. Like, there was no limitation. He just said these are examples of the people I'd appoint. So the condition I negotiated for is I said I want a specific list and a commitment in writing that these are the only people you will consider for Scalia's vacancy. And then I said, secondly, I want you to add Mike Lee to the list. And Trump agreed to both. And so They put out a new list. The 11 went to 21. They added 10 new names. And they put out in writing, these 21 are the only people who will be considered for Scalia's vacancy. They put that out, I forget, it was like 8 or 9 in the morning, and about 20 minutes later, I endorsed. And so we coordinated the two, so the two announcements were virtually simultaneous.
Yeah, and the Manafort story is among the most interesting in the book, and there are so many interesting stories. And one that I had hoped we'd get a chance to talk to, but we have to wrap right now, would be the experience of viewing pornography with Justice Rehnquist and O'Connor. There's all kinds of good stuff in this book. One Vote Away, and that is available wherever books are sold. Senator, I have one quick final question for you. As we head into the Amy Coney Barrett hearing, do you believe that the Kavanaugh experience radicalized some of those Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee, and this will be approached very differently in the coming weeks?
Look, radicalized is probably strong, but I think it stiffened the spines, and I am very optimistic. I think we have the votes. I think Judge Barrett will be confirmed, and I think we will confirm her by the end of the month. It'll be before Election Day, and now there's always a caveat that some bombshell could drop that changes that. I don't know the future. But I doubt that. Barring something truly extraordinary, which I don't see on the horizon right now, I think we're going to have the votes to get it done. And from everything I'm hearing in the conference, I think those votes are solid and strong, and people are impressed. When I sat down with Judge Barrett this week, her credentials and record is impeccable. But what I was most impressed with was her temperament. Her temperament is very scholarly. It is quiet. It is reserved. It is very much a judicial temperament. And you think about her life. A month ago, Judge Barrett was a law professor and federal judge in Indiana, relatively unknown. Could probably go walk her dog in the park, and no one would have any idea who she was. And now she is in this maelstrom of the entire Democratic attack machine raining down upon her, pounding her, and I was very impressed by just the calm and serenity that she projected. Now, look, anyone who can raise 7 kids is probably used to chaos around her and having to be calm and serene, but I think that will serve her very well in the confirmation hearings.
Well, we will certainly be watching. Senator, thank you so much for your time. The book is One Vote Away. Senator, you're also the host of the Verdict podcast, so with Ted Cruz and Michael Knowles, and folks can check that out online. Thank you again, Senator, for your time.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. You can get the book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. I think you'll enjoy it. You don't have to be a lawyer to read it. It's designed to really give you the tools and information to talk with your friends at the water cooler about the 2020 election, about the Supreme Court, about the Bill of Rights, and also to understand this pretty epic and gladiatorial battle of the Judge Barrett confirmation that is playing out right now.
Yeah, I'll second that. I literally just finished the book, and it is a very, very timely read. We will be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.